What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel and another Outriders video. It's finally here. I've gone back to my roots and I've put together my first build for the pyromancer, and the idea when I started out putting this together was that I wanted something that was kind of like speedrun pyro that we used to play in the base game. This is a build that I really enjoyed on pyromancer, and it kind of did two things for me which were very important. Firstly, it was extremely mobile and very AoE intensive, so you could do large clears of rooms, and so it was extremely efficient at running expeditions when you were solo. But at the same time as well, you could also do carries with the build. You had to play it a little bit different, be a little bit less aggressive, but it was also something that you could carry lower players or even players of the same level as you. And this is of course something that's important to me because it is something that we enjoy doing on this channel, playing with viewers, whether they're the same level and we're just shooting the shit and hanging out, or you know, actually carrying people so that they can get to a higher apocalypse tier, or maybe get some additional drop pod resources, maybe get some good gear. So what we ended up using here was one of the new sets that came out for pyromancer with Worldslayer called HEATSEEKER. This is a set that is focused on using thermal bombs, and the idea is to spread these thermal bombs around on as many enemies as possible. Of course, thermal bomb has a whole bunch of additional mods that you can load on it that can debuff enemies to take additional damage and to turn to ash and to essentially spread around. And that then kind of brings it into line with this whole speedrun pyro kind of build, because the idea is that you move through each stage and you essentially just stop, or as you're running you apply these thermal bombs to enemies, and then you can also use overheat and ash blast as a kind of like a combo and a cycle to complete that. In a way, it also plays a little bit like old school Akari ash blast overheat, with heat wave being replaced by thermal bomb. Now, as I said at the beginning of this video, my objective was to build something that was fast and efficient and that was also able to do carries. So while this build is ridiculously good, and the footage you can see in the background right now is me absolutely just tearing every expedition that I go through a new asshole, this is really good at dealing massive amounts of AoE damage, taking down groups of elites with no problem, and you hardly ever see me actually use weapons. However, these do help you to deal additional damage to tougher enemies that survive your combo. Where this build does slightly falter is when you are trying to kill the arbiters, which is of course the brand new end game boss. So if you are doing trials of Taragatar, then the problem is that these bosses will not go down as fast as, for instance, a dedicated phaser build, which I definitely think is what you should rather go for if your actual objective is only to farm arbiters the entire time. Make no mistake, as you can see in the background here, you can kill arbiters with this build. You just have to work harder at it. It's not as easy as just hitting it with like 2 or 3 phases and the boss going down. However, as I said, you can actually do it. Now, where this build does excel is in expeditions, and I'm using expeditions as the primary way for me to farm and to essentially increase my apocalypse tiers. And at the same time, this is of course an activity that we do together with the community, so that is really where this build shines. So moving over to the actual details of the build, the same order that we go every time is we'll look at weapons, we'll look at the armor, we'll look at the skills that we're using, then we'll look at our class tree, we'll look at the Pax points distribution, and last but not least, I'll mention some Ascension points that you should be targeting first as you are slowly but surely increasing up here. Now, weapons itself, as I've mentioned, the funny thing with this build is most of the time you hardly ever have to engage shooting anything. It certainly does help, and it's good for you to practice, because if you are dealing with tougher enemies and the aforementioned arbiters like I mentioned, then you kind of need to bring the weapons into the mix because they do help you to deal an exceptional amount of additional damage. Also, when you start running with other players, enemies are a little bit tougher, so you might find 1 or 2 or 3 sturdy elites that are resisting your combo for the first time, or essentially don't die to the first rotation of your combo, or maybe even the second one, and then just a simple pop with a weapon would usually seal the deal as well. Now, what I'm using on here is specifically the Heir to the Desert, so never mind the fact that it has the messenger skin on it. The Heir to the Desert, and this is a fantastic role in my opinion that I managed to get on Heir to the Desert. So of course it comes with Sandstorm by default, and then in the 3rd slot I managed to get Firestorm to pop, and then I just ended up putting Violent Rupture on here as well, which is a fantastic skill, and it's one of the new mods that came with Worldslayer. Now, the main reason why I actually have Heir to the Desert on here is because it has armor pierce on. So if you can't find an Heir to the Desert, or you don't want to use Heir to the Desert, the main thing you should be looking for is a gun that has armor pierce on it, because that's going to be important when we look at some of the other mods later on that we're using. We're using armor pierce as a way to actually inflate our anomaly power and to deal more damage in that way. Now, as I said here, the fact that this is a tactical rifle of the assault rifle of the tactical variant means that we can also pull off some really accurate shots, and we can deliver this package of Sandstorm, Violent Rupture, and Firestorm right onto exactly what we want to hit. So all in all, I really do like this weapon, and it kind of, I don't know, just fits really well into the build. Now for my secondary weapon, I have another similar kind of situation, so a stat stick, if you will, and another way for me to introduce some additional damage dealing mods onto an enemy that is not going down. So in the case of bosses or anything like that, where I do my full rotation on them, I will hit them once with the primary, switch to my secondary, which is the Molten Idola sniper rifle, which is a one-shot rifle. I'll pop them once with this, and then I'll switch back to my primary and I'll continue on with my combo. Now specifically on here, I have Ravenous Locust on, which inflicts weakness on the enemy and does a certain amount of damage over 6 seconds. And we have Ultimate Storm Whip on here, which deals about the same damage as Violent Rupture and almost has the same cooldown, because Violent Rupture, even though it says 5 seconds, it's actually 3 seconds. And then last but not least, this also has Slashing Twist on it, which kind of stays behind for a while and ends up like spinning and dealing damage. Now in the usual combo with this, you'll sometimes inflict ash on stuff, and that ash will not be stripped off by overheat because of some other mods which we'll look at, and in that case the enemy will be frozen in place, and this Ravenous Locust and Slashing Twisted will keep ticking damage on them, and also sometimes causes like this weird effect of creating essentially like a null zone that enemies have to move through. So if you plan it right and put it, for instance, in a corridor where a whole bunch of enemies are running at you, they'll all be forced to run through this shit, and they'll take additional damage from that. And that's if they're not dying from the fucking multitude of bombs and fire and shit that's raining on them from above. Now in the pistol, I plan to put in a sexy pistol in here with even more mods on, with more weird shit that I can do and pop on them, but at the moment right now I'm simply just using a blue pistol, and I'm actually only cycling between the primary and the secondary. So there's probably going to be some updates to this. I still have a long way to go with my pyromancer to get to 40, and hopefully I can still find like a sexy pistol, like for instance what I found on my Techno, and I can do this. Otherwise I could just probably swap in the Techno pistol. So getting over to armor itself, of course we're using HEATSEEKER. I just ended up using 5 pieces of HEATSEEKER here right now, so obviously that's overkill. I would say you should prioritize pieces that have anomaly power on them, so that would of course be the head, the chest, and the legs. And then the hands and the boots, they actually have health on them. So in the case here, that's helping me with survivability. But if I really want to turn this into a glass cannon powerhouse, then down the line I would obviously find ways to swap in purple pieces with good apocalypse slots into the hands and into the legs, which actually then have anomaly power on them. As for the other substats that I would want on there, status power is fine because it actually charges up the strength of your burns and all of that. Cooldown reduction is always great, although if you have it on 3 pieces, you'll have hit the cap long ago, and so then that leaves something like skills life leech, which is also fantastic because it's just another way for you to actually gain life back. Of course, as we go into higher levels of apocalypse, you actually start suffering penalties for health gain from using your skills, so you definitely have to find other ways to supplement that up and bring it up on par. So skills life leech is a good way of doing that. Since we are also using skills so often, as you saw in the footage before, due to the fact that we have such extreme low cooldowns and the skills actually allowing or proccing other skills to refresh quicker due to our Pax Tree, we are constantly pressing those buttons. You literally are constantly casting skills, so you'll constantly be gaining life if you are actually using something like skills life leech. So on the headpiece here, as mentioned, we have anomaly power, skills life leech, and healing received, which comes with HEATSEEKER. Now just discussing HEATSEEKER's actual bonus that comes from the set, this says that after a successful detonation of thermal bomb, it travels to a target with the lowest health in a 25-meter radius. Thermal bomb applied this way deals 50%, so it deals half its damage, but it can chain up to 3 times. So given in a situation where you have a large cluster of enemies running at you, by throwing 2 sets of thermal bombs in there technically speaking, if they are all low-level enemies, you can stop at that point and you'll literally see as the thermal bombs propagate through the cluster and essentially kill everything. But what we are doing is we're increasing the ramp speed of that by hitting them with overheat and ash blast to essentially kill them faster so that the thermal bombs pop quicker. So on here we have Captain Hunter, because always we want to be dealing more damage to elites, and we have Phoenix Force on here. The main powerhouse of this build is actually not thermal bomb. Most of your damage, maybe even half of it, is actually going to be coming from overheat. So anything that we can do, any mods that we can apply to overheat that augment its damage or benefit us in another way is good. And Phoenix Force definitely does this. It props up our anomaly power for every status that is consumed by overheat. And of course we are using Ash Blast, and by default Thermal Bomb also burns stuff. We have a gun that shoots Firestorm, which actually also burns enemies. So these statuses will be present on the enemy and will be ready to essentially be consumed. Now we also have double fun on here, which means that when we cast a thermal bomb, it can affect two targets. In other words, it kind of like splits up. All right, then when we get over to the chest piece, we have one of the new mods on here. Fire Trap is insane. It's another very big part of the damage proponent of this build. So this says that using the skill on a target marked or afflicted with burn creates an explosion, dealing a certain amount of damage in a 4-meter radius. Now the point is this: as we are casting the first set of thermal bombs, those ignite enemies, or maybe we shoot enemies and they get ignited by the skill on our weapon. The bottom line is, as soon as something's on fire, the next time a thermal bomb comes to that target, it actually detonates like on it and creates like a pop on it that deals damage all around it. Now in the footage that you saw before, you would have seen this, where even just when I'm casting thermal bomb, enemies are already starting to explode. Now the secret sauce on here, which is a mod that I kind of introduced late to this, but I was really happy with the results before I had additional damage to Ashen enemies, Ashen boost on here. So I ended up swapping that for twice as hard. Now what this says is, whenever a skill is used, remember what I said, you're constantly using skills with this build, it inflicts an extra 30% of your anomaly power as damage to enemies afflicted with burn. Enemies are usually going to be on fire because it'll be a mixture of thermal bombs and your weapon and whatever that have set them on fire. And so the point is, this procs a lot. And whenever I look at my damage sheet at the end of an expedition, this is usually either 4th or 3rd in terms of overall damage dealt. So 30% of my anomaly power right now is about 250k, which is a huge amount of damage to be dealing to all enemies that are afflicted by burn every time I use a skill. So this is massive. Then we have no resistance against the fortified here, which is the 2-piece combo that abuses the difference between the combo of resistance piercing and armor piercing. No resistance against the fortified was buffed. This didn't used to be 100%. So this is really good if you combo it with the other part, which we'll see further on later in the gear. And that's the reason why we want armor pierce on our gun, by the way. So then on our pants, we have Master Consumer. This says that your overheat can consume both burn, it can consume burn or ash or both. And if it consumes both, then we actually get an additional damage there. And we are using Ash Blast as well, so a lot of the times enemies will have both statuses on them, and then you're good to go. Now we want Fire Frenzy as well, because we do want to be able to cast 2 thermal bombs, so that would be 4 applications, because it's 2 before we go on to cooldown. And then we have Branded on here. Branded is an old staple of debuff pyro. This of course means that enemies that are affected by thermal bomb take 30% more damage. This is the other side of the build that makes this look, it's fairly chaotic running with this build, because the shit's exploding and stuff's flying all over the place. It can be a little bit frustrating, I think, for firepower builds to run alongside this, because you hardly get time to lock onto enemies and shoot them, and so a lot of times you might miss bullets, you might not reload in time. But I definitely think that this build is ridiculous against like alongside other anomaly classes, just due to the fact that you're putting Branded on stuff as well, which means that enemies, or so rather your party members, are also benefiting from this. So again, this kind of like scratches that debuff itch as well to all of the people that play Pyromancer for that reason. Then when we get over to hands, we have Turn Up the Heat here. This is another new mod that came with Worldslayer. This is fantastic. This says that the skill can be activated 2 times before triggering the cooldown, which means you get 2 overheats per cooldown rotation. So this is fantastic. You can just pop both of those. There's really no reason to space them out. You just hit them both in a row. In fact, I'll talk about the rotation when we get to the skills, but yeah, you can just hammer them out both in a row. Now, I do put Ash increase range on here as well to increase the range of Ash Blast. By default, Ash Blast doesn't cover the same radius as Overheat does, and this kind of brings them both like sort of in line. I mean, in testing, it definitely seems, or not seems, I'm pretty sure that Overheat still reaches a bit further back, and also they kind of work different, right? So Ash Blast like moves out from your character like a ripple and applies in a wave. So if you are trying to utilize, and this goes back to the old Akari Ash Blast Overheat combo, if you're trying to combo Ash Blast with Overheat, you have to kind of like allow for that time, that travel time. So when you hit Ash Blast, you wait a little while, and you'll see as it ripples out, because Ash Blast is going to deal damage, and you're going to start seeing stuff like getting frozen by Ash, and that's when you overheat. And then we also have Bullet Kindling on here in the Apocalypse tier, or slot rather, and this is we deal 12% more damage against enemies afflicted by burn. This is of course all percentage based increased damage. Mods for the game were nerfed on the famous Tuesday patch when early access started, so this used to of course be more, but 12% is still no slouch, and you know, like nothing to, you know, sort of yawn at. And then last but not least, we come to the boots. Now here we have the final new awesome mod that came with Worldslayer on here, called Burning Passion. And this says that Overheat, there's a 30% chance to reapply every status that the skill consumes on an affected enemy. So what this in actual effect means is that there's a 30% chance that whenever you hit an enemy that is burning or ashen, or burning and ashen, that those statuses will just be reapplied again after you do the Overheat. This means that because you're doing this double Overheat combo, when that first Overheat hits, there's a 30% chance that it actually puts those statuses back on again for the second Overheat to capitalize and hit just as hard. That's why we get so much damage coming from Overheat. We also have Death Sentence on here, and this is the reason why we run Ash Blast. Ash Blast benefits a lot from Death Sentence because it increases your weapon and anomaly damage against enemies afflicted by this by Ash Blast by 40 and 30%. Again, this is more for dealing with tougher enemies. The standard combo without Death Sentence murders fucking everything in the game, but elites, champions, and bosses will need that extra oomph to push more damage through on them, and this provides that. And then last but not least, we have the second piece of that two-piece combo, which is Unstoppable Force, that says increases your anomaly power by 50% of your resistance piercing, which we are propping up with armor piercing, which then changes into resistance piercing. So when we get over to the skills itself, obviously we're using Thermal Bomb, Ash Blast, and Overheat. Now, there's a version of this build, I think, that is fully capable of being run as well, that doesn't use Ash Blast and rather actually uses Feed the Flames. I personally feel that this is the superior package due to the fact that you are also benefiting from Ash Blast being a defensive tool sometimes. So we can be caught out where we are taking a lot of damage or something like that. Maybe you're fighting against spirit beasts or whatever they're called that actually lock down your toolbar, so that you can you know, that you take a lot of damage and you can't access your abilities or anything like that. But there can be times that you can run into issues where you take a whole bunch of damage. Maybe you're getting shot by a whole bunch of fucking riflemen, as they do. And I feel that like more than often, Ash Blast has saved me in situations where I'm able to use it in a defensive way as an oh shit button to freeze everything around me and reposition, or turn around and hit them with like some overheats, thermal bombs, or anything like that. But on the other hand as well, Feed the Flames does give you a whole bunch of health, so that is also to be said. I'll probably look down the line as I farm the right pieces, because of course I have it farmed out right now to capitalize on using Ash Blast. I'll look at making like a beta version of this, not to say that it's a worse version of the build, but a different version of HEATSEEKER that uses Feed the Flames, and then we can sort of like compare the two against each other. But know that I'm saying that if you would rather use Feed the Flames, because Feed the Flames got some fantastic new mods itself as well, there's definitely room for using that with this HEATSEEKER package instead of actually using Ash Blast. I'm just an old school Akari fanboy, so I like Ash Blast Overheat, Ash Blast Overheat as we call it on the channel, so that's the reason. Any case, you have super low cooldowns on this. The one that lags a little bit behind is Ash Blast, because we're actually going bottom tree in the class tree instead of top to benefit from additional cooldown on Ash Blast. So the rotation for this build tends to be Thermal Bomb, Ash Blast, Overheat, Overheat. Now, as soon as you finish that combo, your Pax Tree is going to refresh your Thermal Bombs and your Overheats immediately, and your Ash Blast will be lagging behind by about 2 to 3 seconds. So the combo, as I said, is you start out going thermal bomb, ash blast, overheat, then you go thermal bomb, overheat. That's a full rotation right there, and it kills everything. You might have bosses and stuff that obviously stand up to that, but that'll basically murder everything else around the boss, and it'll be you and the boss left. I'm thinking of situations like Boomtown where you're fighting Dr. D. This will murder everything around, and he'll be left standing sort of like in the middle. Now, in this case, when you've completed that full rotation, then your Ash Blast is going to be ready again, and then you can start the rotation all from over again. So essentially one rotation with Ash Blast in and one without. Then when we get over to the class tree, as I've mentioned, we go bottom tree because we want to pick up as much anomaly power as possible. We want our abilities to hit as hard as possible and capitalize on huge amounts of anomaly. So we are going down the tree. We're trying to pick up some cooldown reductions so that we get the maximum benefit from that Pax Tree refresh and just getting our skills available the whole time. We want to be picking up additional anomaly. We want the additional cooldown from wildfire. We want to be dealing more damage against enemies that are burning. So again, this is a very standard sort of cookie cutter way how you would build a Akari Ash Blast overheat. So there should be no mystery to anybody that's ever played that. You're going along here, you're picking up additional damage. What you definitely do want to get is with fire and anomaly, which activating explosive kills gives you additional anomaly power by 12% for 10 seconds. And of course we're using thermal bomb a shitload, so this will be up the whole time. And then we're getting over here, we are picking up chasing the chill away, which just gives you a whole bunch of additional life gain. This is really, really important, especially when you start going deep into the apocalypse tiers, because it starts getting more and more difficult to actually heal your character. We are picking up flames that burn twice for additional damage to elites, and we're trying to get to Graver Blaze, which just gives us a flat 30% increase in explosive skills damage, which benefits our overheat as well as our thermal bomb, so that's fantastic. We do get the marks accumulation here, and we do get World of Blaze here, which gives us some further cooldown. Now, if I was to change anything here, to maybe get to extinction as well, which just gives us that additional 20% damage against enemies that are below 30% health, which can definitely help you against dealing with bosses when you drive them down to that last little bit of health, and then that last bit you're dealing 20% more damage. Then you could consider maybe dropping World of Blaze and suffering a little bit in terms of your cooldown reduction and essentially getting that as well. But this is the standard way that I've kind of been running it, I would say, for the last 2 days, and I'm super happy with that. Then when we get over to the Pax Tree itself, we are going bottom tree, and we're getting melting point, which increases our resistance piercing by 15%. Again, this just feeds into that whole additional anomaly power that we're using that 2 mod combo for, and this actually ramps up even more if we're below 40% life. This actually doubles up and then gets to 30%. We do pick up Master Exploder, which says that explosive skill damage is increased by 100% of your resistance piercing. This affects 2 of our 3 skills, so this is massive and kind of like mandatory for us to get. Then we get Convection. Convection is a no-brainer if you're playing Anomaly right now on Pyromancer. I mean, in any case, you're going bottom tree, but this shit is just too fucking good not to take. Convection essentially means that it eliminates cooldowns basically on your abilities, and it's the reason why you're constantly seeing me just throwing out thermal bombs and everything like that, and with no regard to cooldown management at all. Then we also get Backdraft, which says that your anomaly power is increased by 30% for every skill on cooldown. And what this means is, as you go through your combo, you're going to go thermal bomb, that goes on to cooldown. Then you're going to go Ash Blast, that goes on to cooldown. And then for your last 2 overheats, that's all that left, and that benefits maximally from essentially this. And then last but not least, we get Trigger Sequence, because again, this affects our thermal bombs and our overheats, and this says that when you activate an explosive skill, it increases the damage of the next explosive skill by 25%. The buff stacks up to 3 times when it starts anew. So you're gonna go thermal bomb, that gets the buff going. The second thermal bomb gets the buff bigger, and then you go Ash Blast, and then when you go overheat, you've maximized the buff, and it hits like a Mack fucking truck. And then last but not least, the Ascension Tree here. This is essentially what I've picked so far. Obviously, you want to start over on the anomaly side, and the number one that you should go for is anomaly damage, because this is just a flat increase to damage, and it's like a no-brainer that you have to take this before you take anything else, because it's just going to prop your damage up that much more. Now, Next, I would probably consider taking something like Anomaly Power, which again just further on increases your damage, and then perhaps looking at something like Resistance Piercing, which again actually increases it due to the fact of how we are stacking those mods and benefiting from resistance piercing. Now, of course, you can also put you can prioritize maybe skill leech before you go into resistance piercing if you're struggling with survivability a bit. I would do that first and see how that works before you start diminishing points from this area and maybe putting it into more health or anything like that. You are going to be casting your skills a lot, so you definitely will see a benefit from stacking skills leech. It's actually going to make you gain a whole bunch of HP. And then once you kind of flesh this area out, then you can start tapping out into other areas, like for instance additional damage against elites, and you know, maybe getting armor pierce, which again is part of that combo. And what you could also even do is you can go over here and you can get elite damage mitigation, which actually makes you take a little bit of less damage from those pesky elites as well. And that right there be it for the build. This is my first pyromancer build, and I built HEATSEEKER specifically so that I could use this to farm expeditions really fast, go through the game super fast, and essentially have access to something like speedrun pyro again, which I just enjoy running so much, whether I'm in groups or whether I'm running solo. Let me know in the comments down below how you are building your pyro or which builds you'd like to see. I think from a targeting perspective, I'm probably going to look at farming out pieces for a good phaser build next. I think that's my next priority, and then perhaps looking at doing something with the scorched set. But the next target will definitely be a phaser, and keep an eye on the channel in the next couple of days for some updates on that. And of course, join me on stream to take part in any runs that I do, and maybe, you know, get some good pieces for your gear for yourself as well. But that's it for the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it this far. It's just super important to me that you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, and evening wherever you are in the world. I'll see you next video. Fucking cheers.
They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me. They want the best of me now, best of me now, best of me now, best of me.